Tonight's story is about a woman who begged her husband to come back, and then didn't meet him when he did. The train rolled into a small Connecticut platform. The doors hissed open. Dr. Clark stepped down, scanning the boards for her white dress. He whispered, "Harriet?" The problem was she wasn't there. Not on the platform, not on the road, not at the car, not in the clearing up at their cabin. Just an open front door and laughter upstairs, and then silence. The train slowed the way trains slow when they're about to give you back your life. Dr. William C. Clark stood before it came fully to rest, one gloved hand on the brass rail, the other holding his hat against the draft. The station was small, more platform than building, tucked into the rural folds of northwestern Connecticut. There was no crowd, no porters calling names, no taxis idling like obedient insects the way they did in New York. He searched for Harriet immediately. He expected her. He had promised her. She had made him promise. Standing on the same platform, arms crossed tight, eyes fixed on him as if staring hard enough could keep the train from stealing him away. Now the boards were empty. No pale dress, no familiar posture. No sign of her at all. Clark's mind, trained in hospitals and lecture halls, tried to arrange the absence into something sensible. She could have been delayed. The car could have stalled. She might have gone to fetch him and simply missed the schedule by minutes. And yet his stomach sank with the irrational certainty of a man who has stepped into a room and felt, without proof, that something inside it is wrong. He descended the train station too quickly, boots striking boards, bag in hand, eyes sweeping the road, the tree line, the little patch of open sky beyond the station. The conductor gave him a brief glance, polite disinterest, and called for the return route. The engine exhaled. The train pulled away again, leaving Clark alone with his bag in the trees. It was a bright day. It should not have felt like dusk. He started walking. The road toward Dark Entry ran narrow between woods and stone walls. He knew it well. The turns, the rise of the hillside, the point where the canopy thickened and the light seemed to lose its nerve. He had walked it in every season since 1906, sometimes with Harriet on his arm, sometimes alone. Now each step felt like an argument with the earth. As he neared the access road, the old bumpy cut that climbed into the forest, he heard the owls. Not one owl, many. A chorus, scattered and overlapping, hooting in broad daylight as if the day had forgotten its own rules. He stopped, looking up into the trees as if he might see the source and name it. Owls did not call like that at this hour. Clark knew enough of nature to know what belonged where. In the city, he had learned what belonged in the human body. Here, over years, he had learned what belonged in the woods. The hooting continued, louder now, closer, as if the forest itself were clearing its throat. Clark picked up his pace. The access road was overgrown, ruts filled with grass, stones half swallowed by moss. It had never been a polite road. It had always felt like the forest tolerated it rather than accepted it. He began to jog. The owl's sound did not travel like a flock. Owls don't flock, but it did surround him in the way a crowd can surround you without ever stepping into your path. His breath shortened. His bag slapped his hip. His mind reached for a rational anchor. Harriet might have fallen. A bear might have frightened her. She may be injured. Then he crested the last rise and saw the clearing. His cabin sat there, as it always did. Rustic, 2 stories, built from hemlocks he had cut with his own hands. The pool below it lay still as dark glass. The brook ran bright in the sun, but the front door was not shut. It was open a few inches, like a mouth left slack. Clark slowed, not from caution, but disbelief. His pulse hammered. The owl's hooting layered into a frantic, ragged noise. "Harriet," he said again, softer now, and stepped onto the porch. The door gave easily when he pushed it. The hinges did not creak, as if even the house had learned to hold its breath. He stepped inside, and from upstairs came a sound so sharp it stopped him, as surely as a hand on his chest. A high, thin peal of laughter. Not surprise, not joy, not anything social. Just laughter, stripped of context, pouring down the stairwell like water through a broken pipe. Relentless, bright, and wrong. Clark stood in the foyer with the open door behind him, and the woods beyond that door still screaming with owls. He realized with sick clarity that the sound upstairs was not an intruder laughing at him. It was Harriet. Except it didn't sound like it belonged inside her body. He took one step toward the stairs, then another. His fingers tightened around the banister, wood smooth from years of his own hands. "Harriet!" he called, and his voice broke at the end. The laughter answered. He climbed. 12 years earlier, in 1906, the day had been innocent. The kind of bright summer day in northwestern Connecticut that makes even a hardened city man believe in the possibility of peace. The sky was clear, the hills of Litchfield County rising and falling like slow breathing. Dr. William C. Clark and his wife Harriet drove along winding country roads, their New York clothes already beginning to feel out of place among the dust and sunlight. They were scouting land for a second home. In New York City, Clark was an oncologist, a cancer doctor, and he was also a professor at Columbia College of Physicians and Surgeons. The work demanded a steady mind and a steadier heart, days full of bodies behaving badly, cells multiplying with blind determination, families clinging to hope like rope. Their city life was exciting, yes, full of intellect, movement, purpose, but it was also exhausting. Chaos lived in the city, in the noise, the crowds, the constant demand to stay alert. Litchfield was the opposite. Quiet, hilly, rural, a place where the air seemed to contain more oxygen simply because fewer people argued over it. They crossed a covered wooded bridge, tires echoing in the wooden tunnel. On the other side, the landscape opened. To their right, a mountainside rose steep and shaded, and high up on that mountain, a forest sat like a dark cloak. A road, barely more than a suggestion, spidered off from the main route and disappeared into the trees. Harriet pointed. "What's that?" Clark slowed. He squinted. From the outside, the forest looked darker than the surrounding woods, as if shadows pooled there permanently. The canopy seemed unusually thick even from a distance. It had the look of a place that held its own weather. "I don't know," he said, but his eyes lingered. It was beautiful, the kind of beauty that doesn't ask permission. They turned onto the access road. Almost immediately, the ride became bumpy. The road was overgrown, grass tall at its edges, the track worn as if few had used it in years. Clark drove carefully, but within a short distance, the path became too rough for the automobile. Before they even reached the tree line, he pulled over and parked. They continued on foot. The moment they entered the forest, the sunlight changed. It did not vanish exactly. It thinned. The canopy above them was so dense it filtered the day into a greenish dimness. The air grew cool, refreshing, like stepping into a cathedral. At first, it was very still. Then, as if the forest had been waiting to decide whether to accept them, it woke. Birds called. Small animals rustled through undergrowth. Insects buzzed like distant wires. Harriet smiled. "Listen." A little way ahead, off to the side of the old road, they found a field filled with wild apple trees, branches growing in wild directions as if no human hand had ever trained them. A deer stood among them, calm as a domestic animal, eating apples directly from the branches. Harriet stopped, hand to her mouth. Clark felt his shoulders loosen in a way he hadn't noticed they were tight. They walked farther. Patches of roses and lilacs and bright yellow bitter tansy lined the road like forgotten gardens. They stepped over babbling brooks. Somewhere in the distance, water ran down off the mountain, fresh and constant. And then they noticed the shimmering. The hillside was rocky, and in the rock was mica, a mineral that catches sunlight and throws it back like glitter. When beams of sun managed to poke through the canopy, the forest looked as if it were sparkling. Harriet laughed softly. "It's like enchanted," Clark finished, surprised to hear the word come out of his own mouth. Deeper in, they heard owls. Not one. Several, calling from different directions, their hoots spaced like conversation. To Harriet, it felt welcoming, like the forest greeting them. To Clark, who believed in medicine and reason and paperwork, it simply felt right, like the place approving their presence. They turned back before evening, returning to the car with leaves in their hair and the smell of moss in their clothes. By the time they reached their New York apartment again, they had already decided they would build their second home in that forest. Within weeks, Clark filed the paperwork to purchase 1,000 acres. Only afterward did he learn the forest's name, Dark Entry. It was called that, locals said, because from the outside it looked dark all the time. Shade cast by nearby mountains, canopy thick enough to make noon feel like late afternoon. Clark wasn't concerned. He found it romantic. There had once been a town inside that forest. They had seen remnants of it during that first walk. Crumbling stone walls half buried in leaves. A couple of home foundations scattered like broken teeth across the forest floor. Those ruins did not frighten them, they added charm. They made the woods feel older, as if it had stories. Clark began looking for local builders. He offered good money. He was a successful doctor. He could afford it. Every builder refused, not politely, not with negotiation. Just a flat no. What unsettled Clark was not the refusal. It was the vagueness. No one gave him a straight reason. One man shrugged, eyes sliding away. "It's a hard place," he muttered, as if that explained everything. Another said, "Not up there," and refused to elaborate. Clark assumed the sensible explanation. The project wasn't large enough to justify hauling materials into an isolated forest along a rough access road. The inconvenience wasn't worth the money. He wasn't discouraged. He had grown up on a farm in New Jersey, handy, competent, used to work. If no one would build it for him, he would build it himself. For months, he traveled from New York City to Dark Entry every weekend. He cut down a swath of hemlock on a flat patch and used the lumber to build a rustic two-story cabin. He laid piping from a freshwater spring on a nearby hilltop so they'd have water. At the bottom of another hill, a brook ran clear and cold, trout darting in the current. Clark loved standing there, watching them. He built a swimming pool with mossy embankments right beside the brook so he could sit, listen to running water, and watch fish move like quick thoughts. By Thanksgiving, the cabin was finished. He and Harriet stayed there for the holiday. They sat in the pool, autumn air sharp against wet skin, listening to owls hoot in the distance. "This," Harriet said, voice hushed as if she feared breaking the spell, "is heaven." Clark believed her. From then on, every summer, every major holiday they could manage, they traveled to their second home. They swam. They hiked. They watched the mountainside turn from green to bright yellows and reds. They were happy. And because happiness loves to believe itself permanent, they stopped asking questions. They did no research. They did not press the builders. They did not ask why the road was overgrown. They simply inhabited the beauty and called it theirs. In 1918, the forest made its first demand. That summer, they were at the cabin when Clark received word of a medical emergency back in New York. The message carried urgency the way a scalpel carries intention. He had to go. Harriet's face changed the moment he told her. Not anger, fear. Quick, humiliating fear that she tried to disguise. "You'll be gone how long?" she asked. "I don't know. A day. 2. Her eyes flicked toward the window, toward the wall of trees beyond the glass. She had never liked being alone there at night. It wasn't that she believed in ghosts. She would have laughed at herself if she said such a thing aloud. But isolation pressed on her in a way it didn't press on Clark. "I don't like it," she said. "I'll come back," he promised. At the nearby train platform, she made him promise again, arms crossed, mouth set, watching him bored like she was watching him walk into surgery. "Soon," she said. "I promise." Then the train pulled away, and Harriet stood on the platform until it disappeared, summer air bright around her like mockery. Clark, settling into his seat, had no idea what the next 36 hours would do to his wife. Harriet drove back to the cabin alone. The access road felt rougher without Clark beside her. Each bump felt like a reprimand. The canopy thickened as she climbed, and even though it was still afternoon, the light thinned again, turning greenish and strange. She told herself it was beautiful. She told herself she was being dramatic. But when she reached the clearing and saw the cabin sitting there, quiet as a held breath, she felt the sudden impulse to turn around and leave. Go to town, go to a hotel, go anywhere with other human beings. Instead, she parked and went inside. She made herself busy, the way people do when they can't name their fear. She swept, tidied, put things in order as if order could keep something out. The owls began before dusk. She heard them while washing dishes, hoots from different directions, overlapping. It sounded like conversation. Harriet paused, hands in soapy water, and listened. When Clark was there, she'd always liked the owls, said they sounded like the forest welcoming them. Now she realized something she hadn't noticed before. The owls weren't hooting at the forest. They were hooting into it, as if calling to something inside. Harriet dried her hands and stepped outside. The clearing was quiet, the pool water still, the brook running constant and indifferent. The sky above the canopy was bright, but the light on the ground was already fading. She walked toward the brook and watched trout flicker in the current. Something moved at the tree line. Harriet's breath caught. A shadow, low and quick, gone before she could focus her eyes. A deer, she told herself. A fox. But the hairs on her arms rose anyway, as if her body had heard something her mind refused to name. She went back inside. She bolted the door, not because she was truly afraid, she told herself, but because any sensible person bolts a door in the woods. Night came. Wind in branches, insects, the occasional crack of movement through undergrowth. Harriet lay on the second floor, listening, trying to match each sound to a reasonable cause. Then she heard footsteps, not outside, inside. On the lower floor, slow and deliberate, as if someone were walking through the cabin without caring whether she heard. Harriet sat up so fast her neck hurt. "William?" she called, immediately ashamed. Clark was miles away. The footsteps stopped. Silence. Then, softly, something scraped against the wall downstairs. The sound of something being dragged. Harriet wrapped a robe around herself and went to the top of the stairs. She stared down. The lower floor looked empty. The front door was shut. The windows were black. She told herself the cabin was settling, wood expanding and contracting. She told herself the wind was making a branch rub the wall. She told herself anything that let her remain a rational woman. She went back to bed, and then she heard it again, this time outside. Something brushing against the cabin's exterior, like a hand sliding along the logs. Harriet froze, eyes open in the dark. The sound moved slowly, then stopped beneath the window of the master bedroom. She stared at the glass, expecting, against every sensible instinct, to see a face, to see eyes. Nothing. Then came a tapping. Not frantic, not aggressive. Patient, as if something was testing the boundary. Harriet pulled the blanket up to her chin, furious at herself for shaking. The tapping continued for a long time, then stopped. She did not sleep. Morning brought daylight, and with it, the false bravery that daylight always gives. The cabin looked harmless. The clearing looked ordinary. The brook ran bright. And then Harriet saw the marks. Beneath the window on the outside wall, long, shallow gouges in the wood, like something with nails had dragged them. She stared until her eyes watered. A bear, she told herself, a branch, anything. But somewhere beneath reason, she knew the truth that made her stomach clench. Whatever made those marks had done it slowly, deliberately, close enough for her to hear it breathe if she'd been brave enough to listen. When Clark returned 36 hours later, the emergency resolved, his mind already easing back into the rhythm of vacation, he expected Harriet at the platform. She wasn't there. Then he reached the cabin. The door was ajar. Then the laughter began. He climbed the stairs in a rush, propelled by fear and love and a dawning certainty that something had happened in his absence that he did not understand. The laughter came from the master bedroom. He reached the closed door, put his hand on the knob, and hesitated. The sound was so high-pitched it seemed to vibrate in the air. "Harriet," he said, low, as if speaking louder might fracture something. He opened the door. His wife was in the back corner of the room on the floor, rolled into herself like an animal protecting its organs. Hands clenched into fists, eyes open wide and unblinking. Her mouth was open, not in a scream, in laughter. But Clark saw immediately what made his blood go cold. Her chest was heaving, yet her face didn't move as if she were truly laughing. Her mouth stayed stretched wide, too wide, and the sound poured out of her like it came from somewhere deeper than her lungs. She stared directly at him. The laughter did not stop. Clark's mind flailed for explanation, the way a drowning man flails for air. Seizure, fever, shock, a stroke, some neurological insult. Nothing he knew explained that sound. Nothing he knew explained the way her eyes held him, fixed and vacant at once. He took one step toward her. Her laughter rose higher, as if warning him away. "Harriet," he whispered. Her gaze did not change. The laughter continued, and under it, just beneath the high sound, Clark thought he heard something else. A second rhythm. A faint, wet clicking, like teeth. He backed away. He did not decide to run. His body simply did it, overriding every civilized instinct. He stumbled out of the room, down the hall, down the stairs. Outside, the owls were still hooting, frantic, as if urging him onward. He fled the cabin and didn't stop until he reached the clearing's edge, lungs burning. Only then did he turn back. The cabin sat there, silent from the outside, sunlight bright on its logs. The open door looked like a wound. Clark stood shaking in the clearing and realized that in all his years of medicine, he had never been more helpless than he was in that moment. What happened to Harriet Clark during those 36 hours has never been answered in any way that satisfies. The most honest accounts admit a simple truth. No one knows. Some say Harriet spent the rest of her life in a mental asylum, her mind broken by whatever she saw in the forest. Other accounts say she returned with Clark to New York and took her own life. Clark did not speak publicly about it. Men of his era did not turn private tragedy into community narrative. They buried it. They moved forward. But Dark Entry had a way of refusing burial, because the Clarks' story did not exist alone. It existed in a place that already had an old name whispered around it, spoken not as romance, but warning. The ruins in the woods were not just charming remnants. They were the bones of Dudleytown. Dudleytown was first settled sometime in the 1740s. At first it was small, but it grew quickly. Families moved in, worked rocky land, tried to carve a life from a steep hillside. Then terrible things began to happen. The Carter family arrived in 1759. Shortly after, 6 members died suddenly of cholera. The survivors fled Dudleytown, resettled in New York, only to be raided and massacred. 3 children survived. They were kidnapped and taken away. In 1792, a resident named Hollister died suddenly in the home of a man named Tanner. After Hollister's death, Tanner began obsessively talking about strange creatures he was seeing at night, roaming in the woods beyond town. No one listened. Tanner went insane. His daughter cared for him until his death. Then his neighbor Abel began reporting he too saw creatures, shadowy movement at the tree line. He kept reporting it. He kept insisting. And he too slowly went mad, cared for until his death in the early 1800s. A Revolutionary War hero, General Herman Swift, lived in Dudleytown. After his wife was struck by lightning, Swift lost his mind. In 1813, an epidemic rolled through the settlement and killed many residents. After that, death and mystery accumulated. People died suddenly. People died strangely. And more residents spoke of things moving at night, things lurking in shadow, things watching from the tree line with patience older than fear. By around 1900, Dudleytown was empty, everyone dead or gone, except one last family, the Brophies. Then, in quick succession, their sheep died. The mother died of tuberculosis. The 2 sons were accused of theft in a nearby town and disappeared. The home burned to the ground. John Brophy, the father, wandered into the forest and was never heard from again. Dudleytown became a ghost town. And in 1906, Dr. Clark and Harriet walked through that same forest on a bright summer day and fell in love with its beauty. That's the part the legend always circles back to. The mistake. The step taken without asking why. Today, Dudleytown is still abandoned, and it is illegal to visit. People still sneak in anyway. Some report pockets of cold air where cold air shouldn't be. Some say phantom hands slapped them, shoved them as if the forest itself were enforcing a boundary. Some claim their photographs captured shadowy figures they never saw with their naked eye. In the 1970s, Ed and Lorraine Warren went into Dark Entry and declared the area around Dudleytown demonically possessed. All of it, every story, every whisper, every dare, adds another layer. Another reason someone will go. Another reason someone will not listen. And still, the forest remains what it has always been. Trees, stone, shadow. A hill that darkens early. A canopy that makes noon feel like late afternoon. Owls calling from places you can't pinpoint. Mica flashing like something hidden under the skin of the earth, and people, again and again, making the same mistake. They treat a boundary as a dare. They enter because they want a story. They want something to happen. They want the legend to notice them. Because the moral engine of Dark Entry isn't a demon leaping from the trees. It's hubris. It's the quiet arrogance of believing beauty equals safety. that isolation equals peace, that a place that looks enchanted in sunlight can't become hostile in darkness. Clark bought land without learning its human history. He ignored the builder's refusals because money had always solved problems for him before. He believed his competence could override a place's reputation. And then he learned the limit of his expertise. There are conditions the human mind can enter and never return from unchanged. That was the tangible resolution. He got out. He survived. He returned to New York. But the residue, the thing that does not settle, is what Clark carried with him afterward. Not a ghost story, not a rumor, a sound. Harriet's laughter, high and thin and endless, as if something inside her had learned how to use her mouth without being her. And if you believe the old legends, that's the true danger of Dudleytown. Not that it kills you, that it leaves you alive, but changed. This was Midnight Horror Society, dark curiosity for sleep. Until your next midnight session, sleep well.